Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We're thankful that you're here this evening, and we're also so thankful for all the work that you are doing beyond the room that you're in now, in serving people who are fleeing war in Ukraine. Thank you for being with us. My name is Jennifer Romhilt-Tunahag. I will be your host for today's conversation. And we are looking forward to learning together around how to establish safety as a foundation for trauma healing for the people that you are serving. We're going to have a few introductions. You'll get to tell us a little bit about yourselves as well. And then we will dive into the topic of trauma and safety. There will be time at the end for question and answer, but you are very welcome to ask questions in the chat or the Q&A during our conversation. What you will see tonight will be primarily a group of friends who are uniquely qualified in trauma and disaster response, talking together about this topic, and we want you to be part of the conversation. So please feel free to share your questions with us either during the conversation or in the Q&A following. I'll turn it over now to my colleague and the executive director of the European Freedom Network, Leanne Rhodes. Leanne, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And can I say what a joy it is to have you with us today. I'm sad that we're coming together under circumstances like this, but it is important for us to get together and see the church come ahead as a shining light on this issue. And the church is truly shining a light in the darkness at this time. And we want to thank everyone on this call for what you are doing in response to this crisis. This event has been put on by the European Freedom Network. EFN is a network of over 260 Christian anti-trafficking organisations working in Europe to combat trafficking, commercial exploitation in Europe, and to seek the restoration of its victims. And we work together with strategic stakeholders in order to do that. Right from the start of the war, we're 4 weeks in now, but right from the start, EFN has been working to mitigate human trafficking at the borders. And now, as borders are becoming more organised, we're seeing human trafficking happening more in the transit points. And we've been working very closely with all of our partners to mitigate that. Another thing that we've been doing is to create a quick response for churches to help them work in a trauma-informed way with the people that they're trying to help. And that is part of the reason why we're putting on this call today. As part of EFN, we have a lot of trauma counsellors and people that are used to working with people in crisis because we're used to working with people that have been trafficked. So we just felt that we had something to offer the church people in response to this horrific event. We've also been working with accommodation services. Think of them like the Airbnb of the refugee world. We've been working with them to make sure that their host matching services are also taking into account that traffickers might lurk in those places. And we've been working to help them become safer places. An event like today doesn't happen without people putting in a lot of work, and this event has actually been put together by and quite a number of dedicated individuals who have been working all week to put this event on you, led by Jennifer. So I would like to say a huge thank you to Jennifer for coordinating all of this. I would like to say thank you to all of our speakers today from CNA International. They've been working so hard, not just in this event, but making sure that information is available in multiple languages. We'd like to thank Women at the Well and Reach Global for being a part of this event. We would also like to thank the European Evangelical Alliance, who have advertised it widely, as well as the World Evangelical Alliance. So we would like to say thank you for being here. We hope this event is helpful to you. And right now I'm going to hand on to our Network Services Director, Sheldon Armitage. Thanks, Sheldon.
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you everyone for being on this call. Just to remind you that we are making this available in Polish, Hungarian, and Slovak languages. You can choose that language by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom menu bar and choose your language, and you should hear it in your own language. I want to share just briefly with you about the refugee situation as best as we know it. According to the UNHCR, over 10 million people in Ukraine have fled their homes. 6 million of those are internally displaced people, and currently roughly about 3.6 million have left Ukraine as refugees. And you can see on the slide here some of the numbers and also where they're fleeing to. These are staggering numbers that can seem overwhelming. To put it into perspective, my home country of Slovakia right now has just over 5 million people. So that's over half the population of Slovakia would have left the country because of this war. We do know that not everyone who is entering a country is staying in that country, as many Ukrainian refugees have moved further west to nations that have opened their borders. The European Union has allowed for free movement of refugees in this time, and many Ukrainians do have family and or friends who are established in other nations. But in some of the EU border countries, like Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania, refugees are choosing to stay in order to return back home once the war is over. And as some have said, this is a refugee crisis that we have not seen since the end of World War II. At the beginning stages, the governments and NGOs did not respond as quickly as the public did. And we saw an amazing outpouring of people driving to the borders, picking up refugees and taking them to different places. There was a really strong and positive outpouring of goodwill. And thankfully, now the government has coordinated a lot of their response at the borders along with NGOs so that there is better practices and safer registration and processing of people who are coming across the borders. This is important because, as we know, refugees are some of the most vulnerable people towards trafficking and being exploited, simply because they are in desperate need and they are willing to receive the help of anyone who offers it, even people who have nefarious or evil intent. So, like I said, we don't know exactly where everyone is ending up, but we are going to see in more and more countries and cities around Europe influx of refugees. And this is a big opportunity for us as organization and the churches to really show hospitality and community. The other thing that is being projected is perhaps second and third waves of refugees, depending on how long the war continues and how aggressive or violent the war becomes. The first wave of refugees, generally speaking, had the means and the ability to leave Ukraine. So they either had the financial means or the ability to leave Ukraine. Some are predicting the second and or third waves of refugees may not have those same means and may be more deeply traumatized because they have to have stayed longer in the war zone and seen other things. And so there is a real opportunity for us as as the church, as Christian organizations, and just as human beings to really step up and meet the needs of refugees as they come into our countries. So Jennifer, back to you.
I'm actually going to take over from you, Sheldon. Thank you for giving us the information. I'm happy also to welcome everyone. Thanks for putting in the chat where you're calling from or tuning in from. We are so delighted to be able to have this interchange. I brought something to demonstrate. Okay, yeah. I'm just going to open us and frame our time this afternoon, evening, is about establishing safety. This was a gift from a sister in Grace Church in Southwest Kyiv. And it's been one of the threads as I've been following from a distance what you all on the front lines are doing. One of the common threads for every location has been the desire and need to establish safety. In other words, in order to know how you're doing, you need to know where you are and that you're in a safe place. So I would like to, that's why we chose that as a topic for this conversation initially. And get the honor and privilege of opening us in prayer. So if you'll join me. Holy God, our Creator, you are infinitely perfect, eternally existing in loving unity. Your unlimited knowledge and might rules the universe. You have the ultimate perspective of our lives, communities, and all peoples on the earth. We believe your gracious purpose from eternity is to bring people to yourself and make all things new for your glory. Thank you today. You showed your loving kindness. Truth, time, and wisdom belong to you. Help us to discern in this time what's true, trustworthy, and good, to share it freely. Restore and establish your people on a foundation of love. Renew our hope and turn our sadness into more love and good deeds that bring you glory. For you alone make people dwell in safety. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Shannon. I'd like to invite our speakers to turn on your microphones and your video at this time so that we can introduce ourselves to the audience. Thank you. All right, Sarah, give us a
quick introduction. Hi, everyone. I co-lead For Freedom, which is the global anti-trafficking ministry for CNA International. I've got a passion for trauma-informed care and a background doing music therapy with survivors in Asia.
Caro.
Hi, I'm Cara Hattersley. I am Director of Women at the Well in London. I have worked in trauma and trauma-related fields for well over 20 years. So I'm looking forward to joining this conversation this evening.
Thank you. Shannon.
I'm Shannon Alley. I am a mission catalyst with Reach Global. It's a church planting mission. My background is in public health, environmental, water and sanitation. I've worked in disasters in the past, also served in Bucharest, Romania since 2014, and had the privilege of connecting with the European Freedom Network in this context.
Thanks, Shannon. And Nancy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy Writebol, and it's my privilege to serve with SIM as the Global Trauma Healing Coordinator and have worked in trauma healing since 2014 following the Ebola crisis in Liberia, West Africa. Glad to be here with you.
Thanks. I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from our friends on the call. My name is, as I've told you, Jennifer Romhilt-Tunahag. I am one of the founders of the European Freedom Network. And I am serving a little bit as your stand-in here, as someone who is not a counselor or a trauma therapist. So I will, as I facilitate, I will try to help ask questions that are of concern to you, including watching for your own questions in the Q&A and in the chat. So we're really glad to be here, and we actually have a few questions for you as we get started. Richard, can you put up our poll? We would like very much if you would take just 2 minutes right now to let us know which countries you are working in. You should be able to fill this out on your phone or your laptop. You are able to choose multiple countries if you are working in more than one, how you are working, and the type of interventions you're doing. So we'd like to know more about you, and we will show you the results of this as soon as you are finished. If you have any difficulty with it, please do let us know in the chat so that we can problem solve. If you are not working in any of the countries that's listed, feel free to put your country into the chat. There you go. Thank you, Marion. We're limited in the number of countries that we're able to put into the survey. So we've chosen the border countries, but thank you so much for putting your countries in. Great. Thank you very much. We have a bit of a United Nations, it looks like, among our participants. Welcome to you all. All right, Richard, do we have a good number of responses to the survey? Feel free to close it out when you feel like we've gotten a significant number. It does not have to be everyone. All right. Wow, so of our respondents, the largest number is working in the Ukraine. All right, the next largest being Moldova and then Romania. Thank you, friends. Although I think the Netherlands might have topped. We have a good number of people. Again, Gary, if your country is not in the list, go ahead and put your answer into the chat. I'm sorry that it appears the way it's been formulated, you may not be able to complete it if you don't put in a selection in that. I apologize for that. All right. Richard, are you able to move the selections down, or am I, so we can see? It appears the vast majority of you are working, 2/3 are working as part of an organization, with a further third nearly working as part of the church, and a handful of you are also working independently. And the most common responses are providing humanitarian aid. So the vast majority, over 3/4 of you, at least one of the things you're doing is providing humanitarian aid. So thanks for your time in putting that together. It's good to begin to see, sort of, to understand who's in the room as we begin to share about trauma. And Nancy is actually going to start us off with just an explanation of what are we talking about when we talk about trauma.
Thanks, Jennifer. You know, that is a big question that we ask across the world today. And in the crisis that we look at, we often explain that trauma are experiences in life that are very painful And they're deep and they're distressing. And those experiences can cause deep suffering in our lives. They last sometimes a very long time, but sometimes they're just a one-time event. Those are often called the trauma. And the trauma is that deep wound of our hearts and our minds. And it takes a long time to heal. It hurts every part of our lives, how we relate to others, how our body feels, what we think about, and how much we can even trust God in it. It can make us feel separated from God and from others. And we often feel like we are no longer that same person. You know, trauma always involves loss. And as I said, it can be caused by a single event, it can be caused by a prolonged event or unexpected events, but it overwhelms us. It overwhelms us and it creates fear, it creates helplessness, and many times there's a great horror that goes along with the trauma that we are experiencing. And you know, for those of you who are working with those who are in Ukraine and the countries around, and a lot of humanitarian workers, those of us who are working and volunteering with them and caring for other people, we are sometimes very highly susceptible and can experience vicarious or secondary trauma. When we listen to people's stories of trauma and grief, we sometimes absorb their pain and their experience. And some of those same symptoms that they are experiencing, we too can also experience. Trauma involves our bodies, as I said, and our minds and our hearts, and it affects our whole lives.
Thank you. And you've begun actually to tease the rest of our content for this evening, because the next question that we really have is, how does trauma affect? You've mentioned, Nancy, it affects all sorts of different parts of our lives. So, ladies, what are some of the impacts of trauma on people, particularly this group of people who is currently fleeing war? What can we expect to see?
I think I'll start, if I may, and then hopefully my colleagues will jump in. I think, for me, you know, trauma affects everybody differently, and it's related to your own kind of ways of processing the world, the way you think about things, the previous experiences you may have had. So it's different for everybody. But what we know is that, you know, the people who are coming across the borders, the people who are being internally displaced, are experiencing a massive shock to their system. Everything they know, their every sense of safety, their daily routines, the things that they have always relied on to help them to stay safe in the world, because we all spend our time trying to stay safe in the world, have been just pulled out from under them. And there is a real immediate threat to life to all of them in that system, regardless. Obviously the levels of threat are very different depending which part of the Ukraine and how they are transiting and things, but they are all under a deep threat of their life is under threat. And so they will be experiencing not only the physical hardships and challenges that we've seen many of those who are crossing the border seeing, about lack of food, lack of water, the cold, you know, leaving major possessions at home, leaving members of the family behind. You know, lots of you will know and will have seen that the men dropping their women, their wives and their children at the border and then turning back, and how distressing that is for the children, because of course those wives and those children don't know if they're ever going to see them again. So it's going to affect everybody differently, but what we can say is that everybody will have experienced a significant upheaval in their normal ways of coping with what goes on in the world.
And I think one of the things that they're going to experience or already are experiencing is just feeling like they're back in that event, feeling like they've just left their spouse or their children at the border, and those flashbacks that come, and even the nightmares that come at night. Those are very common symptoms that people who have lived through a trauma like this are going to experience. And they might often become very quiet and not want to talk about it. And then there'll be other people, as Carol said, everybody responds differently, but there'll be other people who will just want to talk it over and over and over again.
Yeah. I think one of the things with this is it's not just a trauma, it's complex, multiple traumas that these people are experiencing, and it's going to be very, very powerful. And I know one of the other ways that trauma can really impact people for quite a number of weeks is in our ability to think clearly, to be able to remember things, to be able to make decisions, and sort of, as we're going to talk about the importance of actually involving them in making small decisions. But we need to be aware that actually, you know, trauma sort of shuts down all the unnecessary parts of our brain that we don't need except to survive. And part of that can really impact our thinking process, and also the part of our brain that regulates our behavior, as Nancy said, and sort of our response. So some people may be extremely over emotional, while others are completely withdrawn.
And you will, I mean, you will have all have heard, I think, well, you will probably all be familiar with the kind of fight or flight principle. The bodies under threat move into either fight or flight, but there's actually 5 Fs, if you like, in how people respond broadly. So you've got the fight response, the getting very angry, getting very aggressive; the flight response, the wanting to run away, being very anxious; the freeze response, where people are just, as Sarah says, just very shut down. And then for some, there's this kind of flop response where and we see that very commonly in sexual violence victims and pussycats as well, sorry, sexual violence victims who just lose the ability to have any kind of response. They're even more shut down. And then the 5th response that's quite common is the friend response, which is of course one of the things that we'd be very concerned about in terms of trafficking, because the friend response is where you look at the person or the people who are putting you under threat and you become very friendly with them as a way to survive. And so you know, they're broadly the responses that people have. So, you know, there's lots of ins and outs of that, and there's lots of layers of that. But just remembering the 5 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, flop, friend. So if someone is behaving in a very angry way with you, it's not about you. It's about how their regulatory system of their body is responding to what's happening. And your role as a helper is just to try and gently reduce that down, to lower that, and we're going to help you talk through some strategies for that a little bit later.
I think another thing just for us to be aware of as well is sort of, we have this initial sort of response as we're sort of leaving and sort of dealing with the trauma, but once we get to that place of relative safety, it's pretty normal for people to crash, to just be absolutely exhausted and fatigued and drained of energy. And I think that's something as well just to be looking for, and be able to support people when they get to that stage. They physically will be exhausted, but also emotionally as well.
Can I ask, I know Shannon, you're waiting to speak, but can I ask, we've talked about the fact that there are some responses that are normal to the very abnormal circumstances around them. What do for us who are in our home countries, we might feel like, oh, this behavior is so strange and so disturbing, but what are some normal types of behavior we can expect? I mean, Nancy, you referred to nightmares. If you are hosting people, what can you expect actually as normal behavior? Could we just...
One of the things I think that you can really and we've seen this in a refugee family where children, especially when they come into the situation, the children will act out, and people will begin to think that this is a bad behavior. But in fact, it's not the normal behavior of that child, but the child doesn't know how to process anything else but to act out. And so I think that's one thing that really needs to be watched for, especially within the children. But normal behavior, I mean, I think that, I mean, we've mentioned several of the things of how people are going to act, but, you know, people become numb. They're not sleeping well at night. And as I said, they will talk it over and over again, tell the story. And as Sarah said, you can't concentrate. You can't think about what's going on or the next steps that you should even take. Those are all just very normal reactions to what is happening, Jennifer.
Shannon, do you have something you were?
Yeah, I've heard you all talk about the pathways for processing have been interrupted or disrupted. Is that a reversible thing? Is that something? It's a tell us more about that.
Go on, Sarah.
I was just going, in response to that, I think one of the principles, like with trauma-informed care, is that actually these disrupted processes can be rebuilt. And one of the key ways of doing that is through consistent, caring, supportive, trusting relationships. It can really actually physically help that brain reconnect and get those processes back again. It's quite remarkable. This doesn't have to be permanent damage that somebody lives with forever. It is possible to heal.
I think it just takes time. Once you've passed through this trauma, you know, it takes time to regroup and to process everything that you've been through. But as Sarah said, it's not permanent. It's changeable.
And I think it's important to just throw in here that you know, as we said earlier on, everyone responds differently. And I think one of the things to bear in mind is that some people that are coming through that you may be working with may appear to be fine. They may have particular coping strategies. They may have been through similar experiences before and therefore have their own strategies for dealing with those things. And or they may be delaying their response to what's happening as another means of survival. So I think it's really important that whilst we respond to people with an awareness of the trauma that they've been through, that we accept that actually for some people they are just going to appear in a way that is fine, for want of a better word. I think that's probably the wrong word, but so it's not, don't, you know, the key I think is not making assumptions about what people are experiencing and how they're experiencing it, but also just thinking, but just, I mean, just remembering, as Nancy has said and Sarah has said, you know, this is about relationships. So even very brief relationships that you're developing, perhaps as people are passing through transit points, things, or, you know, for the few weeks that someone may be in your home, if you're hosting on a temporary basis, these are really key in terms of, you know, this isn't rocket science. It's about being a human being. You know, we know as human beings how to talk to and relate to other human beings. And so what we've got to remember is that there's no magic to it. We just need to be human in our responses to people.
Yeah, that's an excellent word, Caro, as now we change topic. We're starting to get your questions in both the chat and in the Q&A. I want you to know we will address them, but we may bring them in a little bit later in the conversation. My next question for you is just, so why is the topic of this session establishing safety? We're talking about trauma, And obviously, everyone who's taken time to be on this call wants to know, how do I address trauma in the people that I'm seeing? So why is establishing safety so important? And Cara, do you want to just...
Yeah. So, I mean, lots of very, very, very smart people have done a lot of work on trauma and dealing with trauma over many, many years. And what we know, what they know, and what their experiences tell us, all types of trauma, is that there are a few stages of recovery from trauma. The first and most important being safety and stabilization. And then the stages become more complicated about thinking through what's happened, processing, remembering, mourning, reconnecting, integrating. So there's lots of different theorists who use different words for that, but every single person that talks about trauma recognizes, all of the psychological theorists recognize that safety and stabilization is key. And I think it was Robert, was it in the question, who's saying what are the critical things to do in the short time frame when we're working with these people. And so the reason that we thought that we should talk about establishing safety is that everybody on this call, whether you're working in Ukraine with IDPs, whether you're working with people coming across the border and giving them welfare packs and sending them on their way, whether you're coordinating transit points, or whether you're doing temporary hosting, or even hosting over a 6-month period, you know, a 4 to 6 month period, which may happen for some or longer. The most important thing we can do is to help people recover a sense of safety and to feel more stable. So these and doing this isn't rocket science. This, you don't have to be a therapist to do this. You don't have to have had years of training. Again, I'll come back to you just have to be human, but helping someone to feel safe is step one of the most important thing that we can do for people. And
there are, sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to say there are some really practical steps in what is called psychological first aid. And the principle of creating safety is absolutely number one. And we're going to be discussing in a moment sort of some ways that we can be doing that. But it is creating safety. It's creating a calm space, helping sort of people to just sort of calm and be peaceful and help regulate their emotions. It is about creating self-efficacy, which is helping people get that sense of sort of empowerment and decision-making and involving them in decisions, even if it is just, would you like a cup of tea or a cup of coffee? And giving them that small decision to help them sort of choose. It is also about creating connection, linking with others, connecting in with others. You know, we're not meant to go through life alone anyway. Particularly when we are in a situation of trauma, it's vital to be connected in with others. And the last principle is about creating hope, you know, reassuring, you know, you will get through this, you will get through this. That sort of validation and hope is so important.
I think too, validating people's experiences. I think one of the things I'm really keen on is that we, you know, regardless of what it sounds like, whatever someone tells you, just simply validating their experience and validating the fact that what's happening to them is a normal response to an abnormal situation, completely normal response to a very, very extremely abnormal situation in this particular context. So that validation that it's normal, it doesn't feel normal, it doesn't look normal, and no one wants it to be normal, but it is normal to respond in whatever way they're responding to that situation, but just validating their experiences. And I think along with that, perhaps resisting the temptation to ask too many questions. You know, we're very programmed to kind of go, oh, and then what happened, and then what happened, you know, that's kind of how we work. But actually it's more in this situation, it's more about holding back and not pushing someone to talk about their experiences in any depth unless they're ready to. So just instead of asking questions, validate. And in the validation, they will draw out probably parts of their story, but you can just hear that and you can just hold that for them and you can be a witness for that for them. And that's a really powerful thing when someone's experienced trauma, is just that witness, that hearing and that knowing.
I think it's really important too that people are not criticized or judged for what they did do or what they didn't do or who they left with, or made to feel guilty because they did leave. And I think it's also important not to give quick solutions, but for us to be really good listeners to those who want to share. And as Caro said, that we're not pushing them to share, but as they are ready to be able to, for them to open up, but for us to be listeners that, show body language that we're listening, eye contact, that we really do care about them as we listen to their stories, and to be able to give back to them and to just repeat even some of the things that they have shared so that we are truly understanding what they are sharing with us.
Now, Nancy, I know that you have a safe listeners promise. I wonder if you could draw that up. But I note that some of the things that you have been saying, you all just now, really are a good response to Robert's question here in our chat. He says, when relief workers are working with people in transit, they may only be with a family for a day or maybe two. And so we would love to hear your tips on, okay, in this passing, in this fleeting contact, how do we help to establish safety for that person? And Nancy, maybe you can go in with your safe listeners promise, and then the others of you can think about, okay, what else? Fleeting contact, short duration, but how do we help establish safety?
I love the safe listeners promise, and that is that I will listen to understand. I will keep what you share private. I think so many times that confidentiality when stories are told to us is totally broken, and we're sharing it all over and not keeping it private. But that promise is I will keep what you share private. I will not minimize your pain. I will validate how you are feeling. I will not compare your pain with my own pain. I will not give you quick solutions, and I will listen again when you want to share more. Those are just some ways that we can really listen well to people as they're sharing their stories.
That's amazing. I've never heard them all in one go before. That's so powerful. I like the I will keep what you share private. Now we all know there are boundaries to that, and we all know there are times when we can't keep things private. But I love that, because the story, and we know this working in anti-trafficking, the story, the person's name and their story is perhaps all that they will have. Particularly many of, perhaps not so much the first wave of people leaving the country, but as Sheldon said, the next few waves are going to be people with fewer means and who've been bombed out of houses and things. So their story and their name is all they have. So I love that actually it's about respecting that it's their story for them to tell and for them to carry, and not for us to share, in social media with our friends, whatever that looks like. That's I love that. That's fantastic.
And Carol, one of the things that we always say is your story is your story.
Yeah.
My story is my story.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is so important. We need to let people have their story and share it as they will.
Yeah.
And not make it on display.
Yeah.
For advantages that people will take.
And that's part of the self-efficacy, is about saying it's your story to do with what you want. You have control, you have power over this. Yes. And you can make those choices. Yeah.
All right. So what are some other tips that we have for those short connections? Shannon.
I think, Shannon, go.
I was just going to make a comment about the safe listener tips. Irene said that people often repeat the same stories over and over again. And I just am recognizing to be a safe listener is sacrificial, because sometimes, yeah, it's creating that space to hear the same story one more time. And that is part of building trust, hopefully over time with the person, and the role that we can have. But it's truly a sacrificial love that we're being called to. Sarah, what were you going to say?
I was just going to confirm, I think one of the key things, even if we are just in very short contact with people in this situation, is just that reassurance, that validation that, it's okay, you've made it here, you've made it this far, you're going to be okay, you can do this, you've got strength, you're going to be okay, it's going to work out, you're going to be okay, you've got this far. And I think just that calming down, that and sort of enabling them just to know, okay, we've made it here. I think that is really key. Even if you only have half an hour or an hour with someone, you can actually do a lot to really help create that sense of emotional security for someone.
One of the things too is that when people share their stories, or as we've talked about relationship with people, in relationships, you want to make people feel comfortable so that they will tell you this story. And sometimes telling the story is you saying to them, I would love to hear your story. I'm willing to hear your story, but when you are ready.
Yep.
And let them then come to you and say, I would really like to talk. I would love to share my story, but you initiating the fact that I'm willing to listen to you. But as Shannon said, it's a sacrifice to be able to sit down and say, I'm here to listen, and make sure that you have the time to listen, because many times those stories are going to be at length as they begin to share them. And you don't want to be in a hurry, and you don't want to say, well, can we come back to this later? You want to respect them as the person that you are listening to.
And, Caro, I'll jump to you in just a second, but I think that there are certainly ways that we convey, I am present with you, in our posture, so what are some ways that we can help in that situation to demonstrate to someone, I am here for you, this is a safe space here with me? How do we do that? What does that even look like in our bodies?
So I think for me, I think there's a couple of things I would say to that. One is, I think, that's something about, that I don't want to get too technical, but if you think about a baby who's very upset and a mother trying to settle the baby, they use their own body, their own systems to calm down the child, to calm it down, and to take and tone it down. And some of the ways they do that is about lowering the tone of their voice, taking a very stable approach, sitting down, making a very, big, warm, safe kind of space, maybe giving the child food or something that they enjoy, to soothe them. So when we're talking with adults, and I'm not likening adults to children at all, but it's the same nervous system mirroring that we're trying to do. So we're trying to, we need to create this very stable presence that responds appropriately to difficult things in the story. It's not okay for someone to go, and this awful thing happened, and for you to go, okay, you need to, you're human, again, you're human, you need to show that, oh my God, that is terrible, but look, you're safe, it's safe here, look how well you dealt with that, look how well you've achieved that. The Institute of the Sisters of Mercy, who founded my organization, their founder was a big fan of having a cup of tea, and just making that time and that space and sitting down and having a cup of tea, relieving the pressure, so that when you're saying to someone, I'm willing to listen to your story, you're not then creating this sort of vacuum into which they need to put their story or otherwise feel very anxious and uncomfortable. But just that being together, being alongside, accompanying, and acknowledging perhaps that even as they start to tell their story, if it feels like it's too much, that you can say to them, you know, you've told me a lot already, that's really good. Why don't we do the rest another time? Let's just take a break, because it's a lot to process, and you've done so well telling me this much so far. I think the other thing, and I know someone in the comments has just said about people processing as a group. Again, you know, we have talked about community and connection, and how important that is. And I think certainly for the times at the points that people are becoming more settled, we need to start thinking in perhaps the countries that are not on the borders so much, but the ones where people may be transited to. We need to start thinking in our own countries about how we can link the refugees up with others, how we can connect them to existing Ukrainian communities, and things locally. One other thing I'm just going to say about the stories, listening to people, is if they have children, if they are adults with children, then please check with them if they don't want the children to hear some of those things, and maybe find a way to have the children go and play with someone else. It's really important that they know that that they don't have to say this stuff in front of their children if they don't want to.
I just wanted to pick up on, there's a couple of comments that have come in about language barriers and, you know, what to do if you don't speak the same language. And I think obviously, yes, there are difficulties in terms of understanding story, but there is huge power in just being present, in just being able to sit with someone, you know, as Caro said, you know, the cup of tea, providing, you know, sitting beside someone, knowing that you're there. And although they may not be able to, you know, share a story that you would understand, it still plays a significant role in helping them start the processing. But I also think that's where it becomes particularly important to be able to connect them in with others, other refugees. So they may not be able to, you know, you may not be able to understand Ukrainian in your home, but perhaps there are other Ukrainian refugees families around that you could get them together so they can start that process of story and sharing and connecting together. So there are limitations, but don't let that stop you.
Now,
Thanks,
I know.
just noticing that as a network, this is one of the superpowers of connecting among churches in different areas, and this time to be already thinking about connecting people, even if we see them for a short time, to longer term resources, whether that's a support group or a more specialized care or a local church, hopefully.
Brilliant. Thank you. I know your questions are starting to come up now, so I know that you want time for Q&A as well, but I do want to take us on to what are some of actually those grounding techniques that counseling professionals use to help create safety for people? What kinds of things could you do with a friend to help them come into the moment? And I would love to hear some examples.
I made an effort, Jennifer, with my little thing. This is something physical that I'm holding, that I hold on to. It has so many roses around it, so I can sort of consider how I'm doing, what I'm doing. Sometimes deep breathing. I'd love to hear from others. This is a skilled group and something you all may have more experience than me in.
One that we've used is as a way of really just sort of helping diffuse high emotions and intensity sort of emotions, is just a real grounding exercise, and just stop and, you know, what can you see? Tell me one thing you can see. Tell me one thing you can hear, one thing you can touch, one thing you can feel, And it just, again, just helps that connection back into your body. You know, like we mentioned at the start, when you experience trauma, you get very shut down and disconnected. And by focusing on your senses, it helps bring that life and that connection back in. So just something as simple as that, or you know, having something nice to touch is powerful. Listening to music can be very powerful, particularly music as a therapy. You know, it doesn't matter really what style of music, but if you can find music that has a steady beat that is about 60 beats per minute, so, you know, one second a beat, that helps again just to regulate our body systems and create that calm in our body.
And of course, music goes across the language barrier. You know, even giving the mobile phone with your Spotify on it to the person and asking them to choose something if they've got music they like. You know, when you're doing the something you see, you know, what can you see? You can do that without the language, but you could also learn some of their language in doing it. So you can create that connection. You know, shared drawing, sketching, you know, drawing a picture together, you know, each doing a couple of lines and creating something. There's all sorts of things you can do in terms of reciprocal communication that are also grounding. So and also apps as well. I think just, you know, there are apps like, I mean, you know, there's one on in the UK called Writebol, which is just basically a picture of a balloon that gets blown up as you breathe in and blows down as you breathe out. And you just have to watch that. You don't have to understand the words. You just watch the image and breathe in and then breathe out. And it just regulates your breathing. So, you know, there's lots of creative ways to engage with people. And similarly for the children as well. I do want to put a word in here for the children, because we often have slightly higher standards for children than we do for adults in dealing with trauma. And I don't know quite why that is, but we're often like, oh, they're children, they'll be fine, they don't really know. But again, you know, some of these tips around music, around activities, drawing, you know, games on the app, on apps and things, these are other ways to connect with the children as well, and to just give them space to feel and express, if they want to, what's happening to them or what's happened to them or how they're feeling, even if it's as simple as them saying, you know, I miss my daddy, I'm worried about him. Just giving them the space to be able to say that is so powerful, and then validating that and saying, of course you are, you know, I understand, can be really powerful.
And also with children too, that physical rhythmic activity, like it may be if you have a ball, that bouncing of the ball, you know, of encouraging them to, you know, jump or to run or to walk. It's that physical sort of rhythmic sense is very powerful for kids as a way of processing sort of what they can't make sense of.
I'm remembering that in our earlier conversations, we talked about things as simple as encouraging people to set up a schedule, to develop some routines. Now, they may not be able to control everything about their life, but there probably are some things they can choose, like possibly when they go to sleep, or when they, you know, that they take time in the day to take a walk, and establishing some routines like that can also be helpful.
Yeah, I think yes, exactly, anything like that is great. And I think, I mean, you know, even for the little ones, you know, re-establishing bath time, which may be something they haven't had for a long time, but is inherently soothing for little ones. I think also just a word, and I think some people have made some reference to it in the question in the chat, is yes, it's really important that we try and understand and work with the people that we're with to understand what things work for them culturally, you know, how they would what helps them, you know, and it, you know, I know when I worked over in Kosovo, one of the things that we were really conscious of is that we could work with the men or the women. We could never work with a mixed group, because culturally that was just not something that happened. So, you know, we had to learn in that situation that there were certain needs and wants that they had that enabled them to feel safer. And, you know, so it is important that we identify with the communities and the people you're supporting. Again, let them take the lead on what works for them.
Fantastic. I noticed that there are some questions around communities, the fact that Ukrainians will be more communal in their ways than individualistic. And is there anything else that you all would like to say about the need to remain connected during this time, and how even our efforts to help them be connected to people at home and to people in the new place can help? Or did I just say it?
I think you might have just said it. I think that's key. I think finding a way for them to stay in touch as much as they can with people that may, or you know, even just working with your connections to maybe find other people that they've lost track of as they were transiting. You know, that's, I mean, that's a big mission, but even the attempt to do it can be a really powerful symbol of how much you care. You know, by saying, well, you know, there was 2 churches working on that board, or 2 organizations, so let me speak to Mary Jane in the other organization and see if she knows that whether that person is there and went through them, and, you know, kind of that connection making.
We
Sorry, carry on.
We spent some time in one of the refugee camps in Uganda, and I remember that as we walked through lamenting with the people and sharing with them out of Psalms 13 and looking at scripture and how David lamented and many psalmists, not just the psalmist, but there are many ways that or many people that have lamented, and to help people lament and as a group lament together. And I remember we asked this group to do a lament, and normally you see people write a lament maybe separately, or they don't always look to doing it together, but this particular group came together and they decided that the way they wanted to lament was in music, through song. And so they went through a song in their own language in adoration to the Lord. And then they presented this complaint, or it was like almost like they were wailing before the Lord in another song as they shared their heartbreak, you know, to the Lord. And then that third song that they brought in, and all of this was in their own language, but we could understand it by just the tone of the music that they were sharing. And in that third song, they switched to English and they sang the song, "We Have Decided to Follow Jesus." And I mean, it was so powerful as this group of refugees had come together to lament what they had been through and what happened. And so I think it's really important that that we do allow them to lament and to be together as a group and to share, to have that shared experience, because it does bring healing as they share those experiences.
Yeah, I love actually the sequence, Nancy, that your friends went through, recognizing who God is, lamenting the pain and the destruction that they've seen, but again, returning to the Lord. Where else are we going to go? You have the words of life. But
exactly.
But I love that hope actually is part of lament, that we cry out to God against our pain, against our injustice, even perhaps against his injustice, because we know who he is, because we actually trust in his power, in his goodness, in his faithfulness, and we call those things out from him and into our situation. We've had a couple of people now ask, and our last section is on self-care. But before we get there, I do want to ask these questions. We've had a couple of people mention sharing the gospel with people in crisis. And when is it time? When is it appropriate to bring the hope of hope of Christ, the hope of the gospel, into situations where there is pain and despair and even some dissociation because of trauma. What does that look like, friends?
I think we need to, go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I'll do a short answer and then turn to you. I would argue that it's very difficult for people to hear and receive the gospel when they're in survival mode, when they are still in that emergency, sort of fight, flight, freeze response. I think they need to be in a position of at least some measure of safety and calm to be able to hear and engage. Nancy. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I think that you just really, and I agree with you, Sarah, you really pray that God will just give you the opportunity when the time is right. Yeah. And many times we want to be the Holy Spirit and rush in there, and we need to sit back and be patient and wait on the Lord to just really prompt us or to give us. I mean, so many times people will just ask you the question, what are you doing here? And why did you come to help us? And when they ask questions like that, it's a great opportunity to step in and to be able to begin to share. And so I think you just have to be really dependent on the Spirit, dependent on the Lord, to give you direction in when do we share the gospel with them, and knowing that He will. It's not, what they're going through is not without purpose and without a plan.
Now, is it possible? I hear you saying that we need to share the gospel with great care, and I like this comment that Rachel has just placed. Sharing the gospel is much more than words.
Yes,
it is our attitude towards them. It is our availability, our presence. But I think often offering to pray for someone can also be a way of creating the possibility for a spiritual conversation to happen without pressurizing them to actually dig in deeper, but to say, is there some way that I can pray for you? Would you like to pray together for, family members who are, still in the country? Or so there certainly are ways to let people know that we are people with whom it is fine to have a spiritual conversation, and to open the door to that without pushing a Bible through it in the very first instance. Friends, I do want us to talk a little bit about looking after yourself before we respond to the rest of our questions. Why is it important to take care of our own safety, both physically and emotionally, and how do we do that?
You want me to start this one?
Everyone's tired now.
Yeah.
Caro, please.
So I mean, you hear often people say, well, you can't look after other people unless you're looking after yourself. There is some truth in that, I think, but I think what we need to hold in mind is that this is a crisis, a situation that's going to go on for a long time. This isn't going to be over tomorrow. I'd love it if it was. I'd love it if we woke up tomorrow and it was over, but it isn't going to be. So we have to find ways to keep ourselves able to keep doing the work that we're doing on a daily basis, and we need to look after ourselves in that, so that the other people around us don't have to turn their attention away from the refugees and from those we're supporting in order to look after us. We have that responsibility. It's part of our duty to look after ourselves. So I think, there are many ways to do that, and one is, of course, very basic stuff like make sure you eat properly, make sure you drink enough water, make sure, how many headaches have people had because they haven't had enough water in a day and then ended up taking paracetamol and then thinking, oh, hang on, I should have had another drink. So that physical self-care, but also recognizing that what we're facing is unprecedented. It's difficult, and that people are coming across the border in so many different states. People are coming into our homes for us to host, having lost everything and in really difficult situations. So they're going to, that's going to rub off on us. So we need to find safe ways, and we need to find our own connections and ways of managing that. And I'll talk about a strategy I use at work in a minute, but I'll let others come in for a second.
I think it's really important to be aware that, I think Nancy mentioned it at the start, this vicarious, the secondary trauma, like when we are around people who have experienced trauma, we absorb it, and we have to be intentional about making sure that that doesn't impact us, and in being able to debrief. And it is hugely important to make sure that you have someone that you can talk to, that you can pray with, that you can help you carry this load. Like, you don't have to divulge anything confidential. It's about how you are feeling, not what people have experienced or told you. And with the whole self-care, you can think of it like A, B, C. And the A is awareness. So being aware of how you are feeling, being aware of when your stress levels are starting to rise. B is for balance. Make sure you keep balance in your life. Make sure you keep doing the things that you were doing before, still being with friends, going for a walk, exercising, the things, the rhythms and routines. Keep that balance, that time with family and friends. And the C is for connection. Make sure you stay connected into your support network. It can be very easy when we are caring for others in crisis to become very focused on them and their needs, and we forget about our own. So we have to be intentional about keeping connected, keeping balance, and just listening to what our bodies are telling us.
I think it's important too that we learn that it's okay to take time away from the situation. If we need to have a day away or 2 days, whatever it is, that we don't feel guilty about that. But the saying is, hurt people hurt others, hurt people. And so we don't want to be hurting other people because we are so overloaded and because we are carrying that secondhand trauma. So taking time away from the situation and understanding that we're not going to be able to meet every single need that is out there. And I think that's a huge problem when, and we're grateful for so many people that are stepping in to help with the crisis, but realizing that you and I can't solve all the problems.
I think that's really key. I think one of the levels of awareness that's really important, alongside how am I feeling, is away from that immediate thing, is being aware how as a person, what my helping style is. I like to fix things, so I get very frustrated when I can't fix things, and therefore I react, and then I start getting distressed, and then I start getting anxious. And this is not a situation you can fix. You can't fix this situation, and you can't fix people. They can only, So so there's something about us also taking some time to reflect on your own helping styles and what it is that makes you anxious when you can't do it. What do you like to do in terms of solving problems or being with people? And if you can't do it, are you one of those people that really values that storytelling? And if what we're saying to you is don't ask people their story, is that going to be really, really frustrating for you? Just be aware of that and think about how you can manage yourself within a scenario where you can't necessarily go to your best response or your best helping style, because it won't be appropriate.
Can I also suggest for us to be as kind and gracious to ourselves as we are to those we are trying to support? I think often we put some quite unrealistic expectations upon ourselves and what we are trying to do. And I think, be aware of our limitations. I know there will be some people on this call with a lot of experience in trauma and psychologists and specialists, but most of us aren't. Most of us are ordinary people in really extraordinary situation, trying to do the best we can with the limited skills and resources we have, and that's okay. You know, you don't have to meet every need. You just have to do the bit that God's asking you to do. And, you know,
Exactly.
be kind on yourself. You can't fix, as Caro said, you know, you can't fix the situation, but just do the bit that God's asking you to do, and be kind on yourself.
We
And I
all have a part to play, but we all only have a part to play. So we have to do it together. We have to work together and collaborate on it. Sorry, Nancy, you speak.
No, that's okay. I was going to say too, one of the most important things I think, and we don't want to forget it, is that we need to let God care for us too. And we need to be in his word and feeding on him so that we can be used in situations that he puts before us. But if we're dry spiritually, it's hard to really reach out and to help those around us.
It can be easy to skip your devotions when you're
right.
rushing in a crisis situation, but thanks for reminding us of that.
So
Caro,
one of the things I just wanted to share was one strategy that we use when we've had a very difficult day at work. It doesn't happen very often, but we work very hard. When you're working in a space where you're maybe welcoming refugees and you're working for the day, one of the things that's very important is briefing and debriefing. So briefing together before the day, maybe praying together if that's what your organization does, and then debriefing at the end of the day what's happened and how have things gone and what was difficult and who's holding on to something. And one of the things we do at work is I have an imaginary box that makes the staff roll their eyes, bless them. But I have an imaginary box that I put in the middle of the room and I say, what are you holding on to? Put it in the box. And then I lock the imaginary box and I leave it in the office. So that when people, or whichever space, in our context, it's the office or whichever space you're working in, but you leave the stuff there. You don't carry it home with you. You don't carry it out of that space. It's shared, it's held safely. It hasn't gone away, but you don't have to worry about it, and you can get a good night's sleep, or you can go out and enjoy the evening with your friends without feeling guilty because you're looking after yourself. And then if you want to go back in the box in the morning and pick that up and talk about it, that's fine. But you can also just leave it there. It's an imaginary box, so it will dissolve eventually. Whatever works for you. I love the box, but I'm not sure it's not for everyone. But my point is, find ways to leave what you need to behind and not carry it with you. It's not your burden to carry. That's the really important thing. And that may be praying together and leaving it at the foot of the cross.
yes,
You know, that may be the imagery that's we're a faith-based organization, but we don't work in a faith-based way, so we have non-religious members of staff. But you know, I know I leave a lot at the foot of the cross.
yeah, I'm often reminded that there is only one savior of the world, and it is not me.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Jesus is the only savior. He's the only one who's able to carry all of this. Friends, we're coming close to the end of our time, and I do want to take some of your questions before we go. Shannon, have you had a chance to identify any in the chat there that you'd like to bring out to the group?
Yeah, we talked a little about just kind of the universal needs, some questions about adults versus children versus adolescents, or if there are things, I don't know if we've sufficiently answered Jacqueline's question about care for children, but if there's anything else that we can say. I know you did speak that the need for grounding is among everyone, that children may need. We have higher expectations. I heard you say this, Caro, that you have higher expectations on children than probably is realistic. Are there other concerns for adolescents?
I think one strategy, just in answer directly to her question, one strategy might be helping children to perhaps keep a little diary, whether that's written or drawing, of what's happening, what they've done, that they might then be able to share with their parents down the line if they are reunited with them. But if not, they could, you know, if they do it as a letter to their mum or a letter to their dad, you know, the drawing, whatever, that they're keeping a record of what's happening, so that then even if they can't directly give it to a parent down the line, they've still got that record of talking to and having that conversation and being mindful, making that space every day to talk about mum or dad, probably dad, to be fair, in this situation. And, you know, so there's lots of those things that you can do, and having those spaces, maybe trying to get hold of a photograph and making sure they have a photograph in their room of their parents. You know, if they've got a mobile, that may be really difficult, but if it's possible, if not, maybe just a painting of a figure, you know, maybe they can do a painting of their mum and dad and you can frame it, you know. And then they've got that then, but just giving them that little frame that makes it more than something that just gets put on the fridge. That's a very UK reference, sorry, a very American and UK reference, putting pictures on the fridge.
I would love to also pick up Jay's question about when is it appropriate to talk about hope in the context of trauma. When do we bring in the idea that they're going to move on from this and it can be good in the future? When does that come up?
I think one of the things that we like to do is, as people tell their story and as we're listening to them, one of the questions that we ask at the end of their stories or towards their end is, what helped you in this situation? Where are you finding help? And then if we know, well, one of the things that I always ask if I'm in a context of believers is, did you see God at work in this situation? Having people to start rethinking what the purpose, what is this purpose that we are? And many times you're going to get on the other side of a trauma and you will say, I don't know what the purpose is, for a long time. And so being patient, but knowing that, that there is hope, and being able to help people see what helped you and did you see God at work in this situation?
Yeah, I think that the thing that for us to remember is talking about hope is really important. And I think I always contextualize it when I'm working with victims in that, you know, I know there is that it will get better. I know that things will improve. I know that there is a good future. And I also know that that's really hard for you to recognize right now, but I'm holding that for you. You don't have to worry about it because I'm holding it for you. My job is to hold the hope for you. And, you know, we say we have that mentality when we're working with trafficking victims, that we hold the hope for them, you know, and we know how just hopeless many of them are when we get to them. And so, you know, this is the same. We are holding the hope for them. And I think it's okay to say to people, you know, I'm holding that hope. That's why I'm here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. Yeah, at 9 o'clock at night on a freezing cold border. Why would I be here at 9 o'clock at night if I didn't think there was hope? Why would I have opened my house to you if I didn't think there was any hope?
I think that's actually an excellent place for us to close for tonight. We have one more poll that we're going to do just to see if you all are interested in doing further webinars in the future and what that could look like. And Leanne is going to close us in prayer. We know that you may have had questions that weren't answered, but I want to reassure you, we are going to be sending a follow-up email, and we will do our best to address any questions that were not answered in the context of that email. So thank you so much. And we'd like you to just answer these 2 questions for us before we close in prayer. Would you like to have more webinars like this one? And we'll actually move on in the trauma journey if we do that and give more input to you. and how often? So please do take a minute before the recording ends. We want to note for you all that it has been recorded. So this will be available online. And in addition to the 3 languages where we had interpretation, we are planning to add subtitles in some other languages as well, or interpretation, so that it will be available to more people. All right, Richard, are we doing okay on responses? Do we need another moment? Okay. Well, we're glad to see that you'd like to have more of these, and we will we'll probably actually in our email ask you about some topics that you might be interested in, so that you can help us decide how to move forward with this. Thank you so much for joining us, and again, thank you for the work that you are doing away from your phone or computer that has so much impact on people who are in trauma right now. God bless you. And Leanne, will you close us in prayer?
Absolutely. And just before I pray, I would just like to say thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Caro. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Shannon, for all of your hard work. And I can see in the chat, there's lots and lots of thanks going through for just making this so digestible for us, not technical for us. Most of us on this call are ordinary people just wanting to do good things for people in a hurting world. And I just want to say thank you for breaking it down for us and making it easier for us to understand how we can contribute and how important that is. I would like to just pray for all of us now. I would like to pray for you who came to this seminar. And then I would just like to follow up with a scripture that I believe holds hope for all of us. So Lord, I thank you that you are with me. Lord, I thank you that you are with every person that is on this call. And I thank you that you are with and for every refugee, every soldier, every person in this war. And God, I thank you that you guide us and you lead us and that you help us to hold hope for people. Lord, we pray that we will listen to understand. We pray that we will keep what we hear private. We pray that we will not minimize the pain of others. We pray that we will not compare their pain with our own pain, but we will make it about them. We pray that we will have what we need to listen again and again and again. Lord, I pray that you would help us to hold hope for people and help us to hold hope for ourselves. In Jesus' name, amen. I would just like to read from Isaiah 58, verses 9 to 12 from the Message, because I think this verse holds a whole lot of hope for us right now as people of God. It says, if you get rid of unfair practices, quit blaming victims, quit gossiping about other people's sins, if you are generous with the hungry and start giving yourselves to the down and out, your lives will begin to glow in the darkness. Your shadowed lives will be bathed in sunlight. I will always show you where to go. I will give you a full life in the emptiest of places, firm muscles, strong bones. You will be like a well-watered garden, a gurgling spring that never runs dry. You'll use the old rubble of past lives to build anew. Rebuild the foundations from out of your past. You'll be known as those who can fix anything, restore old ruins, rebuild and renovate. Make the community livable again. This is the hope we have in Jesus. And I just want to say thank you for being with us today. Thank you to everyone on the call. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. And we pray that God blesses you and guides you as you go about your work. Thank you so much for being with us today.